This segment will be on understanding light metering. A light meter is a device that allows you to determine the shutter speed or aperture of a particular scene. Just like the internal light meter of your camera, a handheld meter determines the amount of light in a given situation. As we've covered before, with photography, what we're truly recording is light, so to find the correct exposure, we need to know how bright the scene is. With natural light, our camera's internal light meter indicator will give us a reading, but with flash and studio lighting, the light meter is the only way to get an accurate and convenient measurement of the light emitted from our flash or strobes. Light meters in our cameras tell us how the camera sees the light through the lens, also known as TTL. It collects the light through the camera's lens and measures the intensity. Often you may have issues with high contrast scenes where there are much brighter parts of a scene than others. This can throw off your internal light meter, and the result can be an incorrect exposure, depending on the part of the scene the light meter was measuring. Light meters work in two different ways: reflected light and incident light. What's the difference between reflected light and incident light? Reflected light is the light that bounces off or reflects from your scene or subject back to the camera's lens. This is read by your camera's internal light meter. The incident light that is falling on your subject, is read by a handheld light meter. When using a light meter, it allows you to get a reading to measure the light falling onto the subject rather than the light reflected back to the camera. For example, if your subject is wearing all white like a bride, then the light reflected back to the camera is going to be quite strong and can yield an incorrect exposure. The handheld light meter, however, will measure the light falling onto the bride rather than the light reflecting off of the bride, and the resulting exposure will be much more accurate. To use a light meter to read incident light, you need to slide the dome over the metering cell. You'll set your ISO desired in your camera and on your light meter. Then you'll set your shutter speed desired in your camera and on your light meter. And the light meter will give you a reading which will tell you exactly the f-stop or aperture for proper exposure. It returns a reading to produce a mid-gray without being affected by reflective, like white, or absorbent, for example black, subject matter. To meter your strobes in studio, a handheld light meter may require the use of a sync cable, but most light meter models allow you to press a button on the meter and it waits for the flash to be triggered to give you its reading. This is needed because of the relatively short duration of a flash. Once you've set up your scene in a studio setting, you will use the light meter in much the same way as before. You'll set your ISO in camera and on your light meter to ISO 100. You'll also set your shutter speed in your camera and on your light meter to 125th of a second. You'll hold your meter in front of your subject with the dome facing the camera. You're going to press the measure button. It'll blink waiting for the flashes to trigger, and then you'll trigger your flash. And you'll see here it gives us a reading of f5.6. The meter instantly reads out the correct aperture for the scene you have set up. The great thing about this is that you not only will get an accurate exposure, but you don't have to worry about your settings changing during your shoot, unless your model moves closer to one of the lights. Even though we have tools to correct exposure in Photoshop or Lightroom, nothing compares to nailing your exposure in camera. In summary, your in-camera light meter is a convenient tool, but using a handheld meter can provide much better results, and even results your in-camera light meter cannot provide, as in the case of off-camera flash or studio strobes. Acquiring a basic handheld light meter can be a fairly inexpensive investment that'll pay back huge dividends in acquiring accurate exposure.